So today we're going to take a bit of a look at what sociology is. So a big question we ask ourselves is throughout the term is going to be, what is sociology? But one of the big questions that we have about what sociology is or what society is also a question about who we are. That's why we could really go into what sociology is, saying this big question about who am I? So for instance, one of my main interests is looking at art. So for things like film or music, particularly for me, it's black metal or death metal. Also, I'm into films or movies, and particularly horror movies. So, what do these say about me? What do these say about society? So, we're going to be taking a look at. So, I think one of the main things when we're looking at sociology is we're trying to see this relationship between self and society. So, this big question is, what can our interests tell us about ourselves? What can these art that we put out in the world as humans tell us about our humanity, tell us about our social values? So, for instance, horror movies. What can these things and how we portray our fear tell us about what our society values? So, one of the examples I like to give for this is the paranormal activity movies that came out around the 2008 Great Recession. So, one of these all films came out about the time where people were afraid of their homes. So this idea of their homes themselves being haunted. So paranormal activity and all this sequels that were to follow and all the spin-offs were talking about how people were afraid of the very places that were supposed to be safe to them. And this also happened to be taking place during a Great Recession where a lot of people were losing their homes. And with it, to some extent, the American dream of being homeowners. So what these movies start to show us, whether the filmmakers are aware of it or not, is that some deep part of the social value, some deep part of social foundation was being frightened and been struggled with this idea about being afraid of this recession, being afraid of losing our homes. And it manifests itself in these films. So we can think about it a lot now, I think especially in times of crisis or change. If we look around us now thinking about what is our music, what is music coming out now, what is social media posts, or different TV shows that are coming out. What do these different trends tell us about what we value in society? So sometimes it's not so much in sociology, it's not so much what a person intends to do with this symbol they put out in the world. And a symbol here could mean the art itself, such as film or any other type of art, music. What does this symbol say? So even if this person puts this art into the world, this symbol into the world, and they say it means one thing, once we all receive that symbol, it can mean something completely different to us. And what does this say about our interpretation of it? What does this say about what we think about, what we are afraid of, what we want for ourselves and our society? So a lot of what we're going to be doing this term is trying to break down that whole separation between self and society. Sociology can never look at just one or the other. These two things are always interrelated and virtually indistinguishable from each other. So this question of who am I is also a question of what is society, a major thing of sociology itself. So we go a little bit deeper into this. What is sociology? And this is a term we'll kind of be taking a look at throughout the whole semester. Basically, what sociology does is it sees how our own stories, our histories and values interact with and are made by society. So a sociologist isn't so much interested in just what society does to the person, the individual. They're not interested in what the individual gets from society, but how these two interact with each other. So I think this comes down then. So if we're asking what is sociology, sociologists ask two essential questions. They ask one of two things as a way of trying to understand this relationship. So one, they're just trying to understand society. So the question one here, how can we better understand society? And a second part of that, which is always related, is transforming society. So for instance, if you look around in the world today and you see something that needs fixing, if you see problems of homelessness or inequality, and you see this as something you want to change, you want to transform society, sociologists then would first look back and try to understand it better. So one of the first things before you could start actually changing society, so before you change how the world looks, you need to understand where it's coming from. So the understanding part is foundational to the change itself. So what we'll be doing then is jumping between these two things. And I have these arrows here to indicate that it's always going back between the two. So the question we're constantly going to be asking ourselves is not only what problems do we observe, what changes do we want to see, but how do we better understand these problems so that as we move forward we could better solve these problems. So taking an example then, one of our first activities for the classes and our ongoing activity is going to be taking a look at what are the biggest problems facing us today, locally or nationally. A lot of us will see these problems, not only in our local community, I mean as local as just the college itself, a community around the college, the city, the state that we're in, the country that we're in, but internationally and national problems. What are these pressing issues and how do they relate with each other? How do you locate the local problems with the national problems? A lot of times these two things are related. So when we're looking at this, and we're trying to figure this out for ourselves, try to identify some of these problems locally and nationally. So for instance, one that often comes up is issues of homelessness is a national problem. We also find that locally as well. And then one of the things you might start identifying is how does this relate locally versus nationally? How is the local context different? So maybe homelessness nationally has to do with low wages, but maybe locally it has more to do with lack of housing, or that housing itself costs too much money. It's supposed to be a house there. Housing costs too much money. But maybe both of these things are two aspects of the same problem. Wages aren't low enough, housing costs too much, things like that. So if you're trying to think about whatever problem you identify, maybe start off by making a list of some of the biggest problems facing nationally, facing locally, and try to think about how this relates to yourself, your friends, and your family. Because what we're going to try to do with this as we move throughout the term is we start identifying these problems. And it's going to look something like this. So first we're going to identify a problem, P for problem. As we start moving through the term, we're going to start trying to develop our tools and develop our abilities and understanding of these things. So we might start getting more theory on top of that problem. We might start getting more ideas of what other people are doing, so there are possible solutions. By the end of the semester, what we're going to have is you're going to have a framework that's built upon this problem you identify now. I'm going to try to look for these solutions and try to connect them to each other, so that by the end of the term, you'll have some way of actually being able to articulate who you are, what problems you see in society, and how they relate to you and your family and your community, and possible ways you can start coming up with solutions to solve these problems. So when we're asking ourselves, what is sociology? We're constantly trying to balance the differences between understanding ourselves, understanding society and those around us, and starting to see how these things are related with each other, how these things build from each other. And by understanding both of these together, we could hopefully try to find solutions for making our own lives better, as well as our societies and our communities' lives.